The Old Testament is not a series of disconnected stories. It is a singular narrative where every story and character points beyond itself to one who is greater. Jesus, the true and better prophet, priest, and king. Today we are looking at how Jesus is the true and better plagues of Egypt, from Exodus 11, 12 through 14. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast.
Well, good morning. My name is Greg Pinkner. I used to work here, and glad to be back with you. If you wonder where I've been, the truth is I was trying an Irish goodbye, and they caught me. They were like, "You're never in the office. Why are you at the beach?" I was like, "Oh, okay." Would like to say hello. I know it's been since the 1st of August since I've taught because of different schedule things, and there's a lot of you who are new to our church who've gone to church here for almost a month and a half and never heard me teach. You should leave with that memory in your mind of like, that was such a great church. It was so good, okay? So this morning, if you're just joining us, we are through a series called Jesus True and Better, where we look at the Old Testament and see the shadows of Jesus. The New Testament calls many of the things in the Old Testament shadows of the reality that would come in Jesus Christ. We've looked at Abraham, and we'll look at Joseph next week, and all these different places. But we're also trying to pick some things you probably never thought about. And in typical fashion this morning, what I'm going to talk about is the true and better 10 plagues of Egypt. Okay, Jesus is the true and better 10 plagues of Egypt. Now, one of these is incredibly obvious because we use it all the time. It's when we celebrate our most important day in Christianity, which is Easter, right? Easter happens on a Passover. Passover is one of the greatest attributions of Christ and what he would do in the Bible, right? The blood of a pure lamb, spread it on your doorway. When judgment comes, it will pass over you, and you will not be condemned because of the blood of a spotless lamb. Obviously, we know this one very well. What is not as obvious to us or is not as emphasized is that what's actually going on is so much deeper through the plagues. And so this morning, what I want to do is unravel to you some of the things that are going on. Now, if you aren't very familiar with the Moses and the Exodus story, let me run it down for you very quickly. This is one of the most famous stories in the world. It is a center building piece of the three great monotheistic religions of the world: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. This is a centerpiece story. So many people around the world know the story. Moses is a child, a Hebrew child that is adopted into the Pharaoh's family. He then kills a man and has to run and flee. In the desert, he meets God. The God of his people, and meets him at a burning bush, and God says, "You're going to go back to Egypt. All the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt. I'm sending you to go tell the Pharaoh, let my people go." So Moses and his brother or his cousin or his something, Aaron, go with him, and they go to Pharaoh and they say, "Let our people go." And Pharaoh's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And then they just keep going back. Every time Moses comes back, he says, "We're going to strike the land this way." And Pharaoh goes, "I'm still not letting them go." And then it happens, and he goes, "Okay, I'll let them go." And then Moses says, "Okay, Lord, stop this, whatever plague it was." And then Pharaoh goes, "Psych, I'm not letting them go, just kidding." But there's little lines in the stories that we walk right past through that show us of a greater reality that's going on. Before the Passover, in fact, the Bible gives us a picture of what the actual text is trying to push into us. And in Exodus 12, while God is telling them about the Passover, he says this, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord." Now there's two things that I want you to see in this passage. Number one is on all the gods of Egypt, right? So ancient Egypt, like most ancient cultures, had a pantheon of gods. The pantheon of gods you're most familiar with is the Greek ones, right? You know, like Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, all these things. But the Egyptians had a pantheon of gods as well. And they were very devoted to this pantheon of gods. And the other thing I want you to pay attention to this morning as we get rolling into this look at these passages is this line that is repeated so much from the time of the burning bush until Israel is freed from Egypt. God says this, I did a quick count and I could be off by a couple, but 21 times. He's constantly saying, I am the Lord. It will constantly come to a refrain of saying, and then they will know I am the Lord. I am God. So the plagues are very much in God's eyes the message, the way to communicate to Egypt that he is God and their gods are not gods. They're no gods at all. Are you with me? So the plagues each begin a way of demonstrating to Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to all the people that there is only one God, and it's the God of the Hebrews. It's the God of the Israelites. Now, this sets up in all kinds of different ways, but I want to show you, here's the Egyptian pantheon in different ways. Every Egyptian god has a couple of manifestations. You've probably seen hieroglyphics before, but all the Egyptian gods could have figures like humans and then a figure like an animal, and they could manifest in different ways. As you're probably most familiar with the dog's head, this is usually Set. If you see a big orange circle on top of someone's head, it means they're one of the sky or sun gods. But the Egyptians had 4 categories of gods that kind of ruled in the Egyptian pantheon. There was one of the sun. Obviously, if you're a desert people, the sun is a very big deal. There's one of the sky, which is different than the god of the sun. You could be a god of the sun and of the sky, but they weren't considered the same things. There was the gods of the land, of the earth, and there were the gods of the water. And they kind of divided up into these 4 sections, although there was a lot of crossover with them. But they, like the Greek pantheons of God, had an older gestation of gods. So using your Greek mythology that you may or may not have, if you think about the Greek gods, before the Greek gods came the Titans, right? These were the primordial gods that were finally defeated by the Greek gods. They were chaos, the Greek gods were order. But if you ever read about the Greek gods, they were not order at all. They were kind of nuts, all right? So the Egyptian gods that we most know about are often in the same way as the Greek gods, but they also have primordial gods of chaos, right? And the biggest one of those gods is called Nehebaku. And Nehebaku is a snake, the great creation snake, right? His main job was to judge the dead. That's his main job. So what's the first thing that happens when Moses shows up to Pharaoh? Oh, watch my staff turn into a snake. But the Egyptian magicians are able to go, we can do the same thing. Look at our staffs turn into snakes. And if you read the text, what happens? You remember? Aaron's staff that has become a snake becomes a snake and eats the other 2 snakes and then turns back into a staff. Ta-da! You're starting to get the picture here. This is what we're going to watch in each one of the 10 plagues. Is God taking the reality of how the Egyptians worshiped and thought about these gods and destroying it right in their faces, okay? Right to their faces. Now, as you probably know, Egypt is in the middle of North Africa. North Africa is basically a desert in so many ways. And right smack dab in the middle of this massive desert area of the planet, not just in North Africa, but all the way into the Middle East, is the Nile River. The Nile River forever was considered the longest river in the world until we got satellites and got some pictures of the Amazon and went, maybe it's a little bit longer. But the Nile was considered the longest freshwater river in the world. You don't have to know too much about people who lived before basically plumbing to know that people lived near water, right? Fresh water is where people lived. You can imagine what a desert people thought about the Nile River. The Nile River is one of their most important gods. The god of the Nile River is Hapi. Hapi. He is specifically the god of the Nile in its most important phase. The Nile would flood every year. It would flood every year. And when it flooded, it would flood all the land around the Nile with silt, right? It would flood and there'd be all this mud. Well, that mud was nutrient rich, and it's how the Egyptians grew all their food. So this is a massive deal when the Nile will overflow and it will flow everywhere and spread this silt, which then becomes their farmlands. It's incredibly important. He's the god of the Nile in that stage. Now you know what's going to happen. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. There we have it again. By this you will know I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is the Nile, and it shall turn to blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. Later on in the passages of the Nile being turned into blood, it talks about how they had to dig wells near the Nile in order to try to get water in order to be able to have anything to drink that wasn't blood. What you don't catch as much is that this is them basically having to dig up some of their farmlands to get water and make it into where people had to walk through and do all these things that didn't help when the farming season comes, right? Now, I'm also going to be showing you as we come through this, the little subtle messages for me and you, right? The first one is the snake god, right? What does he do? He judges the dead. He decides who gets to go on in the afterlife, right? Sound familiar to anybody? This one is, watch me turn your God into blood. Now, no God is actually gonna turn himself into blood, is he? This is a Jesus hint, by the way. I'll give you the Jesus sign. And you're gonna watch each one of these not only be a slap in the face of the Egyptians, but a prophecy of what's coming. The next, I was gonna give a quiz and hand out prizes, but I don't have enough time. The next plague is what? Frogs. They're frogs, right? Frogs come from the Nile and they swarm the whole place. When the Nile floods and all the silt comes up, their plants start growing, and it is the Egyptian god of fertility to the land. It's going to start growing all our land. It's going to grow all this god. It's a goddess. It's going to come. Fertility gods were almost always female. This goddess is going to come and she's going to grow all our food. Her name is Heket, and she takes the image of a frog. Okay? She takes an image of a frog. So what's the message? Well, the Nile's flooded. It's the bloodlands now. Now we need Heket to come and make our crops grow. But all the frogs move into the city. Are you following me? So I'm taking your hope and I'm moving it somewhere you don't need it or where you don't think you need it. Takes the frogs, move it in. On and on and on and on. I'm not going to stop at each one because it'll take too long to do. The next one is the gnats. You remember the plague of the gnats? There's something very specific about it. And then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. So the plague of gnats is not gnats that fly in, it's earth that's turned to gnats, right? And this is the Egyptian god Geb. Now, in each one of these plagues, the Egyptian magicians have been able to mock it or to convincingly make it look like they could do it. Like, you remember this story, God turns the Nile to blood, the Egyptian magicians go, we could do that too. It's blood too, see? And then they do the frogs, and then he's like, oh, the frogs, yeah, we can do the frogs too. And they do that. When he does the snake, we can do the snakes too. They keep doing it, but this is the first one they can't replicate. And so he shows down the magicians, and the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So already they're going, this is not right. This is the Lord, this isn't us. The next one is the the flies, excuse me. This is Khepri. He has the head of a bug. He is the first of the sun gods, okay? Khepri is the first of the sun gods. Now, why is this important? It's important because Ra is the big Egyptian god. You've probably heard of it, the sun god. Well, Ra took existence in three phases: the morning sun, the noon sun, the evening sun. Khepri was the god of the morning sun, and he was in charge of resurrection. Because he's in charge of resurrection, it's the idea of the sun dies every night and then is resurrected each morning. I mean, how obvious can this get? So he is raised every morning. He's the God of resurrection. Why would he be the God of flies? Well, if you're an ancient people and you see flies everywhere, and then you watch all the flies die, and then you find the places where flies have recreated, they just start popping out of the weirdest places. It seems like they've been resurrected, right? So it's this picture of the resurrection is mine. These gods are not set apart. But the other thing that happens that's very important is this is the first plague where the land of Goshen is separated. Now, if you know some of your old school Sunday school lessons, some of the plagues hit everybody, and some of the plagues only hit the Egyptians. This one is the first setting apart of God's people. Judgment is going to come on you, but not on them. Specifically note that this is with the God of resurrection. Resurrection is going to be reserved for my people, but you won't have it, right? The death of the cattle next, that is Hathor. She's one of the sun goddesses. You can tell by the little orange circle above her head. She is the mother of the pharaohs. Each pharaoh was considered a god, but she was the one who birthed the pharaohs. She is considered their mother goddess, right? She is considered the feminine idea, like ideal. And she often, because she's a mother of all these pharaohs, it was difficult to find a picture that I could use of her. And she is most often represented as a cow, okay? So it's the death of the mother of the Pharaoh's mothers, right? The next one is the plague and the boils that erupted on everyone's skin. That's Isis. Isis is the mother of healing and magic. So they couldn't heal these people. He's in charge. And there's a very specific text in the passage of the boils and the plague that says, and the magicians left and hid themselves. It's those little sneaky lines that you read and you kind of go, oh, okay, but it's not. It's ISIS is your God, and they have already said, this is not us. We can't do this, but now they're actively hiding themselves. There's no power. It's very much Elijah and the prophets of Baal and going, where is your God now? Why are you running away now? Nut is the god of the sky. Now, Nut plays an important role in the Egyptian pantheon. All ancient cultures, their ancient myths come from the fight between chaos and order. It's such a theme in ancient peoples. There's an academic term for it called the chaos kampf, the struggle against chaos. And all creation myth starts with there was this total chaos, and then these gods came together and they made order, right? And so for the Egyptians, Nut was the goddess who kept chaos out. See how she's forming a circle around them so that the chaos can't come in. Well, what's the plague this time? It's the plague that's one of the weirdest to think about. It's the plague of hail and fire at the same time. Now, I've seen bad weather. I grew up in Texas, but none of our hail ever was on fire. But do you see how chaotic that would be? Not only is the hail crushing everything as it falls, but it's setting it on fire. We're not protected from chaos anymore. The locusts come next. That is Set. Set is their bad guy god. Not think like Satan. He keeps trying to take the throne over. You ready? He keeps trying to take the throne away from the actual God. He's the one who keeps trying to do this. Now, when the plague of hail came and the plague of the boils, but especially the hail, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, get everyone out of your fields. Don't have anybody in your fields. The Lord's going to destroy your crops, but he will not destroy your wheat harvest and your other wheat harvest. They had like 2 words for wheat, but apparently they're different. So see what you're seeing here. I'm going to destroy your crops, but I'm going to leave you one of the crops that will feed you if you will let my people go. They don't. What comes next? I will overthrow you. If you will not listen, I am going to use Set, who's the god of the deserts. The locusts come from the desert. A strange east wind began to blow. Here comes the locust. They eat all the wheat, right? And then finally, Ra, or not finally, Ra. This is the plague of darkness. Darkness comes all over Egypt, still light in Goshen. Ra is the god of the noon sun. He's considered the first pharaoh. The very first pharaoh was Ra, and then all the other pharaohs are a god in flesh. Ra is the god of the noonday sun, the most powerful sun. He is the creator of all life. And then the final one, the Passover, is Kanum, or Noom, I can't. Yeah, anyway. Now watch this full circle. He is considered the last of the gods, right? The last of the sun gods. He's the third part of the 3 phases of the sun. He's the evening sun. He's the God that will die. The God who will die. He's the Passover. You following me? He's also the God that is the source of the Nile River. He's where the Nile River comes from. The God who's going to turn into blood. He's also the God who creates all the babies. He's the one who makes the bodies for babies to come out of their mothers. Firstborn son, right? The sun God, who's one God, but he's 3 gods. I could keep going. Pharaoh's son also dies. How can the Son of God die? Yeah, I'll keep going. So how does Israel's journey start? Israel's journey starts with God killing all the idols of Egypt, right? Kills all the idols of Egypt, smacks them down. These are no gods at all. Israel leaves. They wander through the desert. They come to Mount Sinai. Moses says, hang on, everybody. I'm going to go up to the top of the mountain. God and I are going to meet. I'm going to get our rules. We're going to come back. What happens? They build a golden calf, an idol. Let's make a God out of our own hands, and we'll worship him. Okay? Moses comes down off the mountain with 15 commandments, drops one of them, and then goes, there's 10. Let those with ears to hear. What does he say? Do you remember? He says, you've become idolatrous in this life. Everyone who's on the Lord's side, come to me. And the people who are still on the Lord's side come to him. Joshua's one of them. And he says what? Go kill every person who worshiped the golden calf. And they do. They eradicate them. No one is left alive who was worshiping the golden calf. Right? They wander through the desert. God says, you don't. They get to the promised land. They say, oh, we can't possibly take this land. And so then God goes, well, now you don't get to. Your kids will get to. They wander in the desert. When they finally come to the promised land to enter, Moses dies. Joshua's the one who's going to lead them into the promised land. Do you remember what God told them to do when they went in the promised land? Do you remember? Kill them all. Kill them all. Tear down their high places. Kill their gods, is what he's saying. If you know your Old Testament at all, it is consistently Israel walking away, and then somebody rises up to get Israel to obey, and the first commandment the Lord has is tear down their high places. Destroy their false gods. Number one commandment of those 10 commandments, I am the Lord. You shall have no other God before me. Number 2, you will not make a graven image to worship. No idolatry. Romans 1, when Paul's going to start his systematic condemnation of humanity, starts with the charge, since they knew him as God but did not worship him, his wrath is revealed. I will have no other gods before me. Now, you listen to the Old Testament and you go, that's pretty harsh, man. I mean, they killed all these people. Then they killed all their cousins, right? Because Israel's just one big family, really. And then they go to a promised land and God tells them, just eradicate everybody. Because of their evil. That's what he says. Because of their evil, I am charging you to eradicate them. In 1 Corinthians, Paul takes up this line of thinking and he says, now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. He's talking about the golden calf. If you listen to Egypt's story, you are listening to your own story, Christian, because that was a shadow of what God does to us in the gospel. In order to come to me, I am going to show you all your false gods, and we're going to kill them together. If you don't want to kill your false gods, you can't come with me. You follow me? If you follow him and you know that you've accepted Christ as your Lord, discipleship is really nothing more than learning to obey him and killing false gods. Now, I know you're sitting here saying, I don't worship a statue, so I'm golden. Not what he's talking about. Because they really weren't worshiping hieroglyphics. They were worshiping the land. They were worshiping the fresh water. They were worshiping the food they ate. Romans makes it clear they worshiped the creation rather than the creator. Because for some of us, love is our God, or success, prosperity, security. Our relationships are our God, right? Our pride is our God. Our addiction is our God. God, Jehovah God, Jesus Christ the Lord, does not play well with others. And he will not let you have a high place. He won't. I am your God. I am your Savior. I'm the one who's in charge of resurrection. I'm the one who took on flesh and blood so that I could die at the end of the day, to be resurrected, to be the source of your life. What does he say? A fountain of never-ending living water. You follow me? It's not that hard. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, just a few verses later, says, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. Flee from it. Why? Because the Lord does not play games with it. You will give up your false gods, either in joy, because the actual God is now in your life. Not just a graven image that you think floods the Nile, but the one who set the Nile's place into being as the universe was coming into being. Not because you hope that your deeds are good enough in order to earn resurrection, but one who purchased it for you with his blood and his death, whose victory stands assured because death could not hold him. As I said a few Easters ago, the miracle of Easter is not that Jesus rose from the dead. He couldn't die. He had never sinned. The New Testament says it was not possible for death to hold Jesus. The miracle is that he died at all because your sin got put on him. That's the miracle. But if you will not flee your idols, God is going to let you wander in the desert. I'm still going to get you home one day, but we're not headed that way till we're done with this. Death is the release of your soul from all your false gods. They shall trouble you no more. It is the highest of hopes. You can have the Lord deal with your false gods with you as a co-laborer, as a gentle father, as the eternal physician, or you can get rid of your false gods on the day of judgment where he shows them to you and openly mocks them. You chose this over me. Then I will be a blight to your land and your people. You will be cut off from my people. The glories of the gospel are that God fights for us. He fights with us. And he accomplished the victory on his own. Amen? Wandering in the desert is the best descriptor of the Christian life. I put down the false gods I knew about to follow you on this journey, and I know there's something ahead of me that's worth everything. But for right now, I just keep walking. Amen? Let's pray together.